Hello and welcome. Norman Mailer was a Pulitzer Prize winner, acclaimed author, occasional pugilist, and movie director. He twice won the Pulitzer Prize for his non-fiction book The Armies of the Night and his 1980 novel The Executioner's Song. His breakthrough novel, The Naked and the Dead, was based on his personal experiences during World War II. Mailer was a colourful and controversial character. He graduated from Harvard with a degree in aeronautical engineering, was married 6 times, fathered 9 children, ran unsuccessfully for Mayor of New York, and occasionally engaged in public spats with TV hosts. But many of his literary fans were barely aware of his movie career as a screenwriter, actor, and particularly movie director. In the late 1960s, Mailer wrote and directed 3 films, Wild 90, Beyond the Law, and Maidstone, each of which received mixed to bad reviews. Then, in 1987, he wrote and directed the screenplay adaptation of his novel Tough Guys Don't Dance. It starred Ryan O'Neal, Isabella Rossellini, and Deborah Stipe. While on the Cannes Film Festival jury, he hosted a small press conference with a handful of journalists where he talked, among other things, about the challenges, pitfalls, and learnings for authors becoming filmmakers.
I was curious yesterday, you were saying one thing that struck me. You said that when you made this film, it was just felt like the most natural thing in the world, almost as if you were born to be a filmmaker.
Well, I never felt altogether as if I were born to be a writer. You know, I wanted to be a writer when I was young, and then I wrote The Naked and the Dead. And then, of course, that had a large reception. And ever after that, I was a writer. And I rebelled against it for years. I was like a girl who got married too early and wasn't sure she liked marriage. You know, I was married to being a writer. And then there was a point where I began to like this. I began to learn my métier and got better at it. So I really enjoyed being a writer. But by now I've been writing for 40 years and it gets tiresome. So when I stopped writing and started directing just for this film, there was this curious feeling of, yes, now I'm doing something that makes sense to me. And the trouble with writing is you use a portion of yourself. And that isn't, you don't use all of yourself at all. And given the subject of the book, you use this side of yourself or that side of yourself, and you become interested in topics. Just like as a journalist, sometimes I have to become experts on something in a month, and then don't use it again. It's that odd sort of life. But when you're writing a book or a novel, you are on a subject for 2 or 3 years on average. And so you really are forcing your nature. It's one thing to get interested in the subject for a month, it's another to be there for that long, long period. Whereas when you're directing a movie, what's fun about it and good about it is that you're using every last part of yourself. And if you've had a life, and you're at the point where I am, you know an awful lot about a lot of the subjects, but you know them in small ways, and it's awfully useful for a movie. You know, you can do a lot of tidy things while you're making a film. Little problems come up, and you say, yes, I have enough knowledge to make a decision on that, makes sense. Or you know enough about people, so even though you know very little about the subject, you can choose between 2 people because you have a sense of them that you've developed over the years. Also, you learn how to talk to people, which is terribly important when you're a director, because you know, the smallest mistakes become magnified. If you hurt someone's feelings on a movie set, you pay for it over and over and over, and you deserve to.
And you said that it just felt very natural to you. And 20 years ago, when you started to make films, you made 3 films 20 years ago, and then you stopped. If those films had been successful 20 years ago, would you have continued to have made several films, and therefore would you have written less?
I probably would have written a lot less, and I would have made a lot of films, because that was the point when I wanted to be a movie director. I felt the same thing then when I was making those films, and I felt making this one with great differences. The differences were that this one was much more, technically was much more proficient, much more skilled, and instead of working essentially with myself and a few good cameramen, I was working with crews of people who really knew what they were doing. So it was all, what can I say, it was a much more serious venture in all the ways by which you measure seriousness, the amount of money that's being spent, the number of gifted and serious people you're associated with, and so forth.
Have people who are close to you, friends of yours over the past 20 years, do they know you as a frustrated filmmaker?
No. You don't realize what you're frustrated at until you get the deliverance. I didn't think of myself as a frustrated filmmaker at all. I used to think of my movies, and think, gee, it'd be nice to make a movie again. And of course, I'd watch movies with that funny critical spirit you get after directing anything. One of the pleasures of directing a film is it makes you a wonderful film critic thereafter. You know, you really can see into the insides of a film. You can say, oh boy, they had a bad day shooting there. Or how the hell did they ever do that? That man's a genius. It gives you this. It's like an athlete watching another athlete perform. So that went on for 20 years. I'd watch films that way, and once in a while I think if I couldn't do better than that, I really would have to croak. You know, because there's so many bad films being made, so many bad directors. There's so little exercise, not even of taste, but just elementary common sense in the making of films. And so many films are made in distorted fashion. You know, half the people half out on drugs and great ego feuds searing the company and all that. So I really came in as a very chaste, sober, moderate director.
Now you say that you want to alternate, to write a book, make a film, write a book. How is this going to be possible?
Well, I don't know that it will. It may be that I'll have to make a decision. I may just find that I can't write and do movies, and then I'll end up doing one or the other. But I'm hoping that what will happen is that the actor, having worked on this movie for what'll be a year and a half by the time it's all done, has come out, will send me back to writing with a certain pleasure. After all, there are great pleasures in writing. You know, there comes a time when you say, well, I don't have to deal with anyone except myself, and that'll be nice. And if that goes on for a period, if the timing works out well, then it'll work out well. If the timing doesn't work out well, and I'm always giving up a novel just when it's getting good, and having to rush to finish a movie or have to wait around to start a movie, then it'll work out badly. I'm patient. I'll wait and see.
But I'm not sure whether I understand which you would choose if you had to make a choice between writing a book and making a film.
I probably would choose writing because I think, you know, there's a limit to how good a film director I can ever become. I'm starting so late that even if I get better and better and better, there are great mountains, there are Alps, where certain directors sit, and as a writer, I think I'd, I think I can do more as a writer than as a director.
If this film fails, if it doesn't achieve whatever expectation you have for it, does that mean that you wouldn't try to make another film again?
No, I'd try if people offered it. Because after all, failure is relative. It may be that the public will reject the film, or the critics, the public may reject the film with the aid of the critics. I have no idea. And if that happens, I may be angry or I may be rueful, but then the real question is, will someone offer me money to make another film? Because in this business, I just finished saying that in the other interview. It was funny, but now I'm repeating it. But in the movie business, making money is equal to virtue in private life. And if you don't make money, then there's something dirty and obscene about you. And people really don't want to be associated with you. So it's very hard for a filmmaker who doesn't make money with his films or her films to keep making them. And they become demoralized very quickly.
Isn't there a limitation in that sense in the choice of subject, say if you're writing, and the choice of subject if you're making?
Oh yeah, your subjects are much more restricted. And there are very few things you can do unless you're terribly skillful. For instance, there probably were only 2 or 3 directors in the world who could have made a movie like A Room with a View. It just wouldn't have worked with anyone else. It had to be the one person who could break all those rules and come up with a movie that's quiet, where not a great deal happens, and where you sit there and study these quiet people going through quiet moves, and you're fascinated. That's an achievement. I think it's easier doing, obviously, what I was doing, which is having a lot of bing bang, shoot 'em up. But on the other hand, since this is a new occupation for me, I thought I wouldn't try to start at the top.
But the pictures we're seeing on film now, are those the pictures you had in your mind while you were writing your novel?
No, not altogether. But, if someone else makes a movie for you, you never see what you had in your mind. And then, even when you're writing a novel, you don't always, your characters get away from you, and when you conceive of the novel, you see certain characters. By the time you finish the novel, those characters are altogether different. So it isn't a matter of, I'm comfortable with the idea that something can grow away from me and be different than I thought it would be originally, provided one stays close to the change. You see, if you end up with something that's altogether different from what you first intended, and you have not been near it, then it's a catastrophe, which is why most novelists are aghast when they first see the movie that's made of their work. But, having done it this way, I knew what the problems were. I've said over and over and over again, if some other director had made this film, and I had seen it, I would have been appalled. How dare he take such liberties with my novel? But having done it from the other side, my feeling when I was writing the screenplay was, how could this novelist ever think that there was a movie in this book? They're terrible problems, and they've got to be solved. So the movie is different from the book. It's saying something different.
You do rewrite in pictures, so to speak. Rewrite.
You rewrite the script.
Yeah.
First, you rewrite the script, and then what I mean is when you're doing the script, you're getting further and further away from the novel. And then after you've got that script done and you start shooting the movie, you still rewrite. I mean, I occasionally rewrite a scene on the set. But the wonderful thing there, and we finished a day and a half ahead of schedule, is that day and a half, if someone else had written the screenplay that day, I was on the set, that day and a half would have been lost to the screenwriter. Because I would have gone to him and said, look, I want to change this scene. He would say, why do you have to change the scene? It's a perfectly good scene. I'd say, no, it isn't. It isn't working. We would have a fight.
Yeah.
We would have to make it up. We would have to rewrite the scene. We would have been getting in each other's way, rewriting it. Whereas this way, I just say to the actors, look, let's knock out that line and use this line. You know, they say, okay.
It's easier.
An actor will always be happy if you give him a better line than he had before. And in fact, you follow your actors very often when you're making a movie because their instinct very often is what's going to work in a scene. Since they have a culture you don't have, they've been working in scenes for years. They've had the experience of scenes that don't work and scenes that do. Mm-hmm.
Isn't there a big difference between, being the loner and write and being the director and having to communicate with actors, for instance? Also, it's easier.
An actor will always be happy if you give him a better line than he had before. And in fact, you follow your actors very often when you're making a movie because their instinct very often is what's going to work in a scene. Since they have a culture you don't have, they've been working in scenes for years. They've had the experience of scenes that don't work and scenes that do. Mm-hmm.
Isn't there a big difference between, being the loner and write and being the director and having to communicate with actors, for instance, all the time?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I started as one kind of man, and I seem to have moved over to another kind. 40 years ago, when I first was published with The Naked and the Dead, 39 years ago, I really wouldn't have been able to. Well, I'll wait. I really wouldn't have been able to direct a film at all. I was much too shy, and every failure out in the world was a great blow to my ego. What's interesting about being a director is that you have to be terribly seasoned. Your ego has to be terribly seasoned. Your skills are what they are. Your film culture is what it is. But if your ego is truly seasoned, in other words, you had a great many knocks on the bad side, and a great many lifts on the upside, and so your ego now floats rather nicely through experience. And it's not that hard to go through the hurly-burly of directing a film every day, because at any given moment, your opinion of yourself is going slightly up or slightly down. Someone comes up and asks you a question, and you give them a good answer, you think, oh, that's nice. And the next moment, someone comes up and asks a question, and you say to yourself, I don't know what the hell to say. And so you phony it, and you can see by the look in their eye, they say to themselves, oh, God, another one of those. But being a director is absolutely lively that way. It's a little bit like taking a walk through strange woods, and things pop up at you. And as your character changes over the years, exactly the things that would have made it impossible for you to be a director and disagreeable, which is having to be authoritative about matters over which you very often know little, it's become enjoyable because, after all, the function of the ego is to decide matters about which you know little. The ego is terribly executive. And as you get older, you learn how to do it. And whether you're right or wrong, you learn that, what you learn is a fundamental thing about life, that a decision, even a bad decision, is better than no decision. And so you move on, and I grew into the possibility of being a director. That doesn't mean I think being a director is a nobler form of humankind than writing, but it's just that you need a temperament for it that I just didn't have 25, 30 years ago.
Did you need maturity?
Well, it's a species of maturity, but it's also it's a species also of creativity. It's being creative in a lot of little places. A director, in a sense, furnishes a home, a creative home in his work.
Head of family.
Yes, he's also a head of family. He's a general. He's a boss. He's a pal. He's a lot of contradictory things all at once.
Does he feel like cutting his ear off sometimes?
Cutting
his ear off sometimes?
No, that's for painters.
Your writing is distinguished by a variety of subjects. In other words, you can't be put into one box or any pigeonhole. What sort of subjects, say in America today, would appeal to you either to make movies when you write a book?
Well, I don't know that I know, and if I didn't know, I don't think I'd tell you, Ray, because it's very dangerous to talk about a subject until you're doing it. I think you discover subjects that you can, work on. Before I started writing Tough Guys Don't Dance, I didn't know whether I could write a detective story or not. There's some who say I didn't, but the fact of the matter is just that you discover what you can do in the act of doing it. And so I don't really think ahead. What will happen is I might, let's say I want to direct a film, I hope I don't get into a situation where someone says, well, if you come up with a story in the next 2 months, I'll let you make it. Because then you start looking around and you arbitrarily decide that you're going to do this or that. But the idea would be that you're going along, you're reading, you're thinking, and all of a sudden something crosses your way and you say, I want to make a movie of that. And then I know by now how to recognize that impulse. It's analogous to falling in love. There's a different sort of certainty. You know you want to do something. You know you want to proceed on a given road.
Didn't, in this case, you write this book in only about 6 weeks? Because it was
2 months, yeah.
2 months. Because it was, in fact...
Well, I was in a desperate situation. I was in an absolutely desperate situation where if I hadn't been able to write the book, I would have gotten into... I would have owed the publisher an enormous amount of money, and I would have had to earn so much after that, I never could have caught up, because with the income tax and all that, it would have been a fiscal comedy. So the alternative was to do this book and fulfill the contract in 2 months. And it was the first time in my life I was up against that wall, and I thought, well, I'm going to do it, a good book or bad book, he's going to have a book at the end of 2 months. And then I did my equivalent of getting down on my knees and praying and thought, well, let it be a good book this time. So I have a great fondness for that book because it came out as a pretty good book, and there was no guarantee it would. It had to be, for the first time in my life I was running a book to finish it within a certain period of time. Well, I had done a serial in a magazine, but that was 8 months, and this was 2 months that I had.
Did you change your approach to writing to make it work?
No, I just worked harder than I'd worked in a long time. I'd worked morning and afternoon. I took off 3 days in 61. And and I must say, it took me a year to get over it. So.
Excuse me. There is a lot of violence in the book and in the film. Isn't it very different, if you write a violent scene or if you actually put it on film, it's much more direct. Did you take it back a little bit in the film?
Well, I took back all the violence I could take back. I didn't want to have a lot of blood in the film. I felt for one thing that because I had characters in the film, the violence was going to seem much more extreme. Most violence in films, where you see somebody and their heads literally cut off, and there's blood all over the screen. It doesn't mean it's shocking, but it doesn't mean that much because you don't know the people. They're all here. You get to know the characters well enough so that some of the films when Jessica is killed, it's quite shocking. That's the one place where there's a lot of blood on the screen relative to the other shots. But my feeling was that a little horror, a little bloodshed was going to go a long way in this film. And so I did that way. But people had the feeling that it's a horrible film. And then in the fight, let me finish that thought. People have the feeling it's a horrible film because they know the characters. If we're walking along with a friend and, let's say, some stones kicked up by a car and it hits them in the mouth and breaks a couple of their teeth and they're bleeding, it's horrible. That's more horrible than seeing someone with an arm cut off that you don't know in a movie. And so, to the degree you get to know your characters in a film, the horror is expanded greatly. If you were making a pornographic movie, you could have one moment in the film that was pornographic, nothing else. But if you had a famous movie star, and at one moment in that movie, she were to open her legs, and you were to see something that is never seen on movie stars, that would be the most extraordinary piece of pornography ever. I think we were talking about that a few weeks ago. And so I felt that I wanted to keep, there was 6 murders in the movie. I thought I wanted to keep it all down, very restrained. Just little peaks here, little peaks there. Let the feeling of something awful going on remain in the background. The only place where the film breaks loose at all is in the fight, which I wanted to be violent and strong and give people a feeling of what a street fight is like. Because street fights are much worse than boxing in the ring. There's something open and naked and ugly about them. And,
very nasty.
Very nasty, yeah.
Are we going to see a Norman Mailer style of directing? Do you think you want to make other films? You will make other films. Let me ask you first of all, what films do you want to make?
Well, I'm not sure yet. I've been thinking about it, and your mind ranges far and wide. I think maybe some year I'd like to make a movie of Ancient Evenings, but I'd want to be ready for it. I'd like to make a picture or two before it. Because Ancient Evenings would be, it cost a fortune, and you'd be out in Egypt or wherever for a couple of years and dealing with 10 camera crews and 10,000 men, and I'm not ready for that.
And you have the example of Cleopatra before you.
Yes, and so that, but what I do in between is what I'm not sure of.
But based on your books?
No. I'd rather not base them on my books. I'd rather do one in between that's not based at all on my books. Because I think it's just, in the movie business, it's just, so far as I can understand it, there's not only typecasting among actors, there's typecasting among directors. And once you get the reputation of, the only thing he can do is direct his own books, he's hopeless for anything else, then no one takes you seriously. And the moment they don't take you seriously, once again, you're through. Critics come to sneer. It's a very odd, there's an odd relation between film and the media, I think, is even odder than it is between literature and the media.
How was the initial reaction you had to the announcement that you were directing a film?
You mean a year ago?
Yes, when it was announced that you were going to direct a film.
Well, it varied. My present wife hates my underground films. She thinks they're terrible. So when she heard it, she said, "Oh, Norman, don't direct it." And then there was great curiosity among people. Are you really going to direct a film? Oh my God! The funny thing is that although we pay great lip service to literature, among the people I know, they're not at all impressed by your writing. We all know so many writers in my group that anyone can write a book. That's like having breakfast, but to direct a film, oh boy. So.
This might seem like a really basic question, but I don't think we've actually asked it. Like, what is it that appeals to you about making films that writing books doesn't give you?
Well, I think I did answer it in a way before. It's that you use all the sides of yourself that have not been employable while you're writing books.
Like what? What do you mean by all the sides of yourself? You mean the social self, the gregarious self, the commander in you?
The commander in you, the trickster in you, the bully in you, the nice guy in you, all the person who has a small knowledge of interior decoration, the feeling that you have a sense of color. What good is a sense of color when you're writing a novel? Once in a while you can write a colorful description of something. It's frustrated. And so you have all these elements in yourself that are never expressed now can be used.
So it's the actual process. It's not necessarily that you're going to reach a larger public, or that,
no.
or that you haven't really talked about putting your story into images. It's more the actual process of working with the people that you seem to emphasize, rather than the.
Well, I think a director's an aesthetic engineer. They're an engineer first and an artist second. And I just got the signal that we must terminate.
Can I just ask you one question
Sure.
about you on the jury, because I'm going to start off the piece for
I can't
American
answer
Radio.
that, probably.
Oh, I know, but can you just make some general comment about the films at Cannes this year?
No, that's what I can't do.
Not at all.
We're supposed not to say anything about it on the assumption. It's like espionage, where counter-espionage. You get a piece of information here and a piece of information there, and this and that. Very astute people say, "Oh yes, the jury's going to pick this or that." And they want to avoid that.
Okay, just something about being a Cannes man, being.
Well, it's agreeable to be a jury. In France, it's wonderful to have a badge or a title. I know no West European country where that's more true.
Have you been here before? You got an
sure,
award.
I lived here.
Didn't you get an award once here?
No, I never been to Cannes before during the festival.
Huh.
So start at the top, be a jury.
Very quickly, the casting of the film. Were all of the cast at the top the ones that you specifically wanted in the roles, or did you go through a whole lot of...
Well, you start with... I wanted Ryan O'Neal almost from the beginning, just about from the beginning.
Why?
Because I knew him, and I knew there were sides of him that had never been seen in movies before, and I was pretty confident that he would go out with it. Also, he's very bright, which most people don't know about. He's really intelligent, and I thought he has sides, and I thought that was necessary for the character. And also, oddly enough, it's a tough role because it's not a dynamic role; it's a passive role. So I wanted someone who's essentially lively, so that if you get a deep, gloomy actor, I think people get sick of following this person who's never doing much. It's the problem in Hamlet, you see. And so I wanted So Ryan was perfect. And Deborah Sandlin, we just got lucky. We got her through auditions, and
She's very good.
yeah, and it just she was marvelous to work with, and that was fine. Isabella, I called up because I saw her in Blue Velvet. And I thought she has such guts. She's so brave to make that movie, Blue Velvet, and she was willing to do our film. And I thought that's fine. And then the other actors, Regency and Wardley, we got again through auditions and working. Most of the actors we got through auditions.
When does this film open in America?
Probably end of October, beginning of November.
Okay.
And she was willing to do our film. I thought that's fine.
Would you ever have wished for a more quiet, more harmonious life? Because I think you had quite a stormy...
Everyone always wishes for the life they didn't have. But I'm not unhappy. I think everyone has their sad story, and I don't find mine too bad. But, on balance, I'll accept my life.
You were once an actor. I saw you in
Ragtime.
Yes. Was that a better experience than being a director, or?
No, much worse. It's like being in the Army. It's hurry up and wait. You sit around. One of the worst things is talking to extras. It's terribly tough. Because you put down, after I was in a banquet. And so there I was sitting at a table with people I met that morning, and there were no drinks, just colored water. And the social burden was enormous. You can imagine what it's like to make small talk with people for hours with no drinks, and you don't know them, you have nothing in common. It goes on and on and on. And then the cameras start, and you got to smile. And, so I think we're getting that hint. I think they're ready for us to...
Thank you very much.
Norman Mailer continued to write up until his death from renal failure in November 2007. His prolific output, both in its diversity and volume, was extraordinary, from novels, magazine articles and letters to poetry, movie and television screenplays. He was also one of the co-founders of the famous newspaper The Village Voice, and was considered an innovator of creative non-fiction or new journalism, along with Truman Capote, Joan Didion, Hunter S. Thompson and Tom Wolfe.